In this chapter, we're going to be working on yet some more invertebrates. In the last chapter, we started talking about invertebrates, which, as we said, were animals that do not have any backbones. So we're going to continue that in this chapter, and with the exception of the last section, everything that we're going to be talking about in this particular chapter are arthropods. Now, as younger students, you may have done a study on insects. That's a pretty common thing that younger science students tend to study. And insects are going to be included in this study of arthropods. But arthropods are actually much bigger than just insects. And as you saw in your reading today, you're going to have basically 5 characteristics of arthropods. One is that their bodies are segmented, and we did see that body segmentation in the annelids with the earthworm, but annelids don't have these other structures that we're going to be talking about. The body segmentation that we're going to see in the arthropods, some of them are going to have 2 sections, some are going to have 3, some are going to have a whole bunch, but for all of them, their bodies are going to be divided into segments. Their entire body is also going to be covered by an exoskeleton. Now, we do not have an exoskeleton, we have an endoskeleton, which means that our skeleton is on the inside of us to provide the support and the structure that the rest of our body needs so that we can stand up, so that we can move. The arthropods, however, have an exoskeleton, which is on the outside of their body. And a lot of times we think of it like armor, and it is for protection, but it's also for structure. These animals are larger than the animals that we saw before. And some of these animals are going to be on land, and so they don't have the water that's going to be able to support their body. So they've got to have something to support their body so that they are able to move. So that exoskeleton is not alive. It does not grow with the creature, and so these are the creatures that are going to have to molt or get rid of that outer shell and grow a new one as their bodies grow. They have appendages, arms, legs, not really arms, I guess, but they would have legs or other types of claws, and they are all going to be jointed. And if you think about that, that's just going to enable their movement. If you've ever tried to walk without bending your knees, you know that that's pretty difficult. And so these appendages are going to be jointed to enable the creatures to move better. They also have what's called a ventral nervous system. They are going to have more of a brain and nerves that are going to run throughout their body. And ventral means that it's going to be on the bottom side of them. And so arthropods tend not to like to be flipped over because they know that they've got to protect that nervous system so that they're able to respond to what's going on around them. Dorsal is on the back, ventral is going to be on the stomach side. And then they're also going to have an open circulatory system, which we talked about briefly in the last chapter, but we'll talk about it even more in this chapter with that open circulatory system, where part of the time your blood is in veins and part of the time it's just washing over the different tissues in the body to provide that the gas exchange and nutrient exchange that's necessary. So those are going to be the main characteristics of all of the arthropods. Like I said, the last section, we're going to be talking about something different, but most of the chapter is going to be on arthropods. As you go through the chapter, the very first creature that we're going to talk about is the crayfish. And just like the earthworm in the last chapter, where you were expected to know a lot of the anatomy and be able to label a diagram of that, the crayfish is going to be that creature in this particular chapter. You're going to be expected to know a lot about both the external and the internal features of the crayfish. If you're not familiar with the crayfish, it looks kind of like a miniature lobster. They're not the same, but they are similar to one another. So if you've not ever seen a crayfish, that's kind of what they look like, kind of like a miniature lobster. You're going to be talking or reading about 4 specific classes of arthropods. We're going to be talking about the crustaceans, which is where the crayfish is. Then we'll talk about arachnids, which is spiders. If you've ever heard of arachnophobia, that's for people who have a fear of spiders. So we'll talk about the arachnids. We'll talk about the chylopods and the diplopods, which are your centipedes and your millipedes. And then we will do a section on insects. So all 4 of those are arthropods, and as you go through and read these different sections, what I want for you to do is to fill out a chart that's going to enable you to compare these different classes of arthropods. So behind me on the board, I have a chart, and I will step out of the way here in a second so that you can see the whole thing at once, because you'll probably want to pause the video to be able to copy this chart down. But you can see that along the top, I've got the 4 classes that I just mentioned: the crustaceans, which includes your crayfish, your arachnids, which is your spiders, chilopods and diplopods, which is the centipedes and millipedes, and then your insects. So as you go through and are studying each one of these different groups, what I would like for you to do is to compare for each of them, how many body regions do they have? If you studied insects before, you're probably aware that they have 3 body regions, but how about the rest of them? How many body regions do they have? We said they were segmented, so how many regions do they have? How many walking legs do they have? Again, if you studied insects, you probably know that they have 6 legs or 3 pairs, but what about the rest of these? How many walking legs do they have? How many antennae do they have? An excretory system. This is where we're finally coming into some of these creatures now that have more elaborate systems. They can't just get rid of all of it through their skin, through diffusion. They have to have a system to get rid of it because their bodies are larger. So what type of excretory system do they have? What sort of organs are there to enable them to get rid of the waste that they have collected? Digestive system. I probably should have had those switched, because obviously you've got to digest your food before you're going to have anything to excrete. But how are their digestive systems different in these 4 classes of arthropods? How are their respiratory systems different? How do they breathe? We know that with the earthworm, they just took in oxygen through their skin. But how does it work with these guys? These guys are bigger, so they need a specific type of system to enable them to get the oxygen that they need. And then any other thing that you notice that maybe would make these particular classes of creatures stand out. I do have a few of the boxes with the slash mark through them because there wasn't a whole lot of information in the book, especially with these. This was a really, really short section, so you won't find a whole lot about your chilopods and your diplopods. So I'm going to step back here for just a second. This would be a good spot for you to pause the video so that you can see the whole chart, get it copied down in your notes, and then you'll be looking at that as you go through the rest of the chapter, filling that out. The next time that we meet via video format, I'll be going through this with you. So it's going to be a while until you have another video from me to watch. I've provided other videos for you as far as the crayfish goes, so that you can talk about, because you're going to be dissecting a crayfish in this particular chapter. And so you'll have videos to help you get through that. And then we won't meet again until you've gotten through reading most of the things in the book about these. And so then you'll be able to fill this out, and then we will go through that the next time.